am a petroleum engineer by training. I've been doing tax work on utility, industrial, and mineral accounts for the last 30 years. And I was asked to please give a short last word on the assessor's perspective on valuation. I thought it was interesting that Larry picked the title, The Last Word, an assessor's perspective, and that's the name of my favorite cocktail. So it just came to me, okay, so I'm going to talk about The Last Word, my favorite cocktail. And I discovered this cocktail at a bar in New York at this, fancy cocktail bar, and I said, make me something. And he made me this drink. He said, what do you like? And I said, I like something that's dry but flavorful and so forth. And he said, so he made me this cocktail. He said, the trick to a good cocktail is 4 things. You start with alcohol, which is the main ingredient. Then you have something sweet, something bitter, and something acidic. And you can make lots of cocktails with combining those things. And I thought that's the same as taxes. The main ingredient is taxes. We all got to pay our taxes, and why? Because we fund our roads, we fund our police departments, we fund the infrastructure that makes our businesses work, right? Because you couldn't have broadband or cell service if you didn't have citizens that had these different things that government funds. Then who pays? Well, the homeowners pay a big, big chunk of it, commercial property owners, and then utility and industrial properties, which is what we're talking about here, and that's been my main focus for about the last 20 years. I consider our job to be multi-focused. Number one, it's to level the tax burden, to make it equal across all of the individuals and all of the companies that are paying taxes. So the homeowners don't carry an undue burden, so that the utility and industrial properties don't carry an undue burden, so the commercial property owners don't carry an undue burden, to equalize it. And then I have to comply with the laws. Like Georgia has certain laws. We're in Texas. Texas has certain laws. So certainly I have to comply with those laws. And then, of course, collect the taxes that supports the functions. So the sweet ingredient, to me, is the part where we actually sit down and we talk about the values. That is my favorite part of the tax year, to either sit down in person, to talk on the phone, to actually figure out what is an appropriate value for your tax bill. And so some of the things, when we look at unit valuations, we appraise some properties with unit values and some with depreciated cost values. We have to figure out a future income to capitalize. And how do we figure that out? It's more of an art kind of than a science, but it's also a science. It's numbers. And someone pointed out earlier that your wireline companies, we thought early on that as your access lines went down, the profitability would go down. And it has gone down some, but I think not nearly as quickly as the number of individuals that are hooked up to these old phone, to the ILECs, the phone companies. So what we've seen is that the revenue stream has stayed much flatter than we expected it to. I was at a conference the other day, and the guy says, okay, how many of you have wired home phone lines? And nobody raised their hand. He said, this is the first time that I've seen that. And I raised my hand and said, we own an office building. The elevators are required to have wired phone lines. And we have to have 3 of them, and they charge me $60 each, and they're never used. So that's some of the revenue to the phone companies, but also we're looking at what they talked about, the backbone of our wireless networks. So we look at unusual expenses, rebooked costs, and then you have a lot of mergers, and mergers are always a problem with on both the side of when we do a depreciated cost and when we do a unit valuation. How do we get a good income stream, a good historical income stream that would represent the value of the new to arrive at a value for the new company? The second way we do is depreciated cost, which is something of what we were talking about just a minute ago. So we have to come up with the correct replacement cost new. Then when we look, and a lot of times with acquisitions, we'll have rebooked cost. Now remember we talked about the important thing is to make it uniform. So if we have one company over here that's given us their historical cost, another company over here that's giving us the rebooked cost, we're not doing our job of uniformity and appraising the companies fairly. So we really need historical cost, if at all available, to make them equal. And then, of course, you've rebooked it because the value that you've put on your books is less maybe than a depreciated historical cost, and that's something we then need to take into account and look at for all the companies that give us historical cost and the rebooked cost. We need to choose a good depreciation schedule, which we talked about as well. So if it's a very short life type of equipment, we're going to have a short life and probably a low floor. It's something that's being replaced all the time. And then, of course, we have the categories of property that I'm going to go back to because this is something I really wanted to talk about. And if you can give us an electronic spreadsheet, which most companies are now, it helps tremendously with getting a good valuation and being able to actually negotiate a value with the companies. These are some of the examples. This is actually 4 different wireless companies that give us their historical costs and year new, and these are the different categories. And you can see they're not the same at all. So we have to go through and say, what does LTE RF equipment in wireless company number 1, how does that, what schedule do we use, and what equipment in wireless company number 2, wireless company number 3, and wireless company number 4 does the LTE RF equipment represent? How do we get the types of equipment on the appropriate schedule when they're called different things? So it's really helpful to be able to talk to the company and say, okay, what type of equipment is that? So that's one of the things I wanted to point out that from our point of view makes our job more difficult is trying to figure out these categories of equipment and in your particular company, what type of equipment, what depreciation schedule should we put on that particular type of equipment? Of course, some of y'all might say, well, they all should be on a 3-year life with a 5% floor. Not going to happen, sorry. The bidder. The bidder is, for me, changes after certification. Thank you. I've got to come in during the protest season. Let's figure this out. Let's get it straight. And some of the things we have is double assessments. A lot of times in Texas, you file a rendition, and for cell companies, for example, they will file their cell tower equipment and all the new stuff that they've got around, and they may also file in that same rendition their retail store equipment. I cannot tell you how many times it's happened, not a whole ton of times, but a few times, and when it is, it's always bad that we see that equipment and you don't put that it's a retail store. You just categorize it in some type of category. We put it in our spreadsheet. It goes on the roll for us as cell tower or cell equipment. Then it's also sent to the appraisal district. They put it on as retail store, commercial, personal property, and we've got a double assessment. So I would say very clearly on your rendition when you send it in, if it's retail, personal property, do something on there and say this is the retail store personal property, not just an address, but something that indicates very clearly that this is business personal property that is typically, in Texas at least, going to be done by the appraisal district, and this is cell tower equipment or other types of of equipment that is typically done either at the state level or by a different department at an appraisal district. Also, please let us know if you've changed ownership and you need to send the information to a new address. Notify the appraisal district of that early so that they can make sure they get the original notices to the correct owner. And then again, late protest. We don't see that too much in this technology, but it's always very difficult to try to make changes after the deadlines. Then you got to pay taxes, right? That's the acid. So, and with paying taxes, we don't collect taxes, but it's just it's just an accounting thing. So make sure that, you know, that the tax department has your correct address, the correct department, and that you always check your tax bills, make sure the amounts are correct, and then make your timely payments. Then start all over again next year. So I just wanted to give a real quick overview. Stay within my 15-minute. I'm perfectly available to answer any specific questions you may have. I enjoyed that last presentation and that little back and forth. I really enjoyed that. That's why that's the sweet part of it. But our tax system works because of all those things. And as an assessor, my job is to get it right. And we're going to have a little disagreement maybe about what we think the value should be, but my job is to make sure that the values are fair, they're equal, they're uniform, and they comply with the tax laws of the state in which we're doing the appraisal. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll answer any questions.
Yeah, about 5 minutes for questions, if anybody.
We got a question back here.
No, get the mic. Come on, get in front of the camera.
Sorry. So thank you for that. Question about the useful lives. You mentioned that you have to select these useful lives. You have to map to the proper life tables. What, as taxpayers or appraisers, what can they bring to you that's helpful for you to make that decision? To what the appropriate use of life is.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And so I think explaining the type of equipment is probably the most important thing. And also, when we get, especially on spreadsheet appraisals, when you look at a particular category of property and you can see that there is property that's still being used that was put in the ground in 2000, that to me is, and there's a lot of it, that's not going to be a 3 or 5 year life property. So, and that's some of the discussion we've had. The other thing that my little pet peeve is when I get a rendition and it says, oh, here's the stuff we bought this year and we want a 50% obsolescence factor on it. No. You made a business decision to purchase that at whatever you purchased it for in the past year. Now, it may be on a short life. It may be a 3 year or a 5 year property with a small floor, but I do not believe, and I think that it just from a business perspective, you would not have spent that money if you thought it was only worth 50% of what you just spent on it. Anything else?
So you actually did get the last word.
Thank you.